the three of us actually have had our lives sort of woven together by a concept that I haven't heard really talked about that much here in the conference, personal time series. Each of you, how many of you have at least one wearable on? Okay, so all of you are generating personal time series that is going into some company's cloud. You know, there I happen to have, you know, my Apple Watch, my Pixel with Google, my Oura Ring, and my SpO2 Thummy from Welu. All of these are generating data, and yet, how many of you that are doctors are using the data from your patients, which is vastly more than you ever get with a quarterly or annual blood test? None of them. And so that, to me, is what is the near-term transition to a medicine that's going to look very different than how it's practiced today. And we're fortunate here to have Mike Kurisu, who is a physician, in fact, one of my most important physicians. So, Mike.
Yes, no, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. Everyone can hear okay? Yeah, I'm sitting here as the bridge between these two individuals, right? These are both my patients, but both of my collaborators professionally. And it's been just an absolute privilege to be a part and the family medicine doctor for Smarr family. My name is Michael Kurisu. I'm family medicine, primary care by trade. I have a secondary background in integrative and holistic medicine, and for the past 20 years, I was the founder and director for UCSD's Center for Integrative Medicine. I became an expert at all of the different healing modalities that people did. This is outside of the medical system. So this is where they spent their money on Ayurvedic medicine, traditional Chinese medicine, massage, yoga, acupuncture. 20 years ago, we laughed that yoga was a four-letter word in the hospital because doctors didn't really want to deal with that. It's come a long way. I've seen that transition happen a long way. I wanted to do clinical research in all of that, and it became very frustrating because if any of you have done clinical research, double-blind placebo-controlled trials, that's the gold standard. Doing that on a massage therapy treatment, you had to raise a lot of money, you have to a lot of in that to have a good power to show validity, and at the end of the day, you're showing a study that massage is good for that person. So I wanted to flip the script on that a little bit, and instead just study the individual. How do you study the individual and take a deep dive on that person through time? And I was thinking about all these methodologies about just how to do clinical research like that. And I couldn't come up with a concept, and then Larry came to my office, literally walked through the door just for, had no idea who he was, walked through my door for a complaint of sciatica, you know, bread and butter of a primary care back pain type thing. And I was treating him with an osteopathic treatment, trying to make his sciatica better, and I'm telling him about this, and I'm like, Larry, it'd be great if we had data on you, you know, before and after. We could show if this treatment was actually working. Was it good for you? Like, do you have any data? And most of the time, patients, when they have data, they bring their cholesterol reports or their blood test or whatever it is, or their MRI, and you look through it. And Larry said, well, Mike, I need to show you my data. I'm like, okay, well, just give it to me, show it to me. And he's like, no, we have to make an appointment. I'll bring you over. And you know, then I came in here. And so, Larry, do you want to explain to me what we're looking at here?
Yeah, well, I'm a professor of computer science at UCSD, emeritus now. And I built an institute called CalIT2, and in it we had these very large-scale visualization systems. This is something like 32 HD monitors. And then I've been collecting since, I guess, 2008, time series of all sorts on my body. So each of those graphs is either a blood or human immune from stool samples, variable, and then the red is when it's, you know, above normal, green is when it's normal. And you can see just instantly how dynamic and fluctuating one individual's body is when you incorporate all of it, including the microbiome. I had Rob Knight, one of the world's top professors of research in the microbiome here. We gave a presentation on that. Some of you may remember that. And yet that's outside of medicine today. It's not included. So there's vast amounts of data that we have, but we're somehow not using it. And so the thing that I really loved when Mike came forward is Mike was interested in my data. And it wasn't just saying, I'm the doctor, I'll tell you when I need data, I'll get you a blood test. It's like I came in with a quantified self of massive amounts more data than he'd ever seen from any patient. And so that turned the light bulb on in Mike's head. Well, if you're a future patient, I need to learn how to be a future doctor that's data rich, and of course, data is what AIs eat. So until we get more data, as we've heard the last few days, what is the AI going to work on across real people?
Yeah, and we're looking at 20 years of biomarkers here. So this is Larry's personal time series of just blood biomarkers. So I get this all the time. I mean, I'm no offense to you, Larry, but when there's a reaction I get when I'm like, you're Larry's doctor. So one reaction is like, wow, that's fascinating. And it is. I've learned so much. If you don't know him, just look his name up. It's a wealth of information from colliding black holes to supercomputers to microbiome. And he's published research papers and all of that. And I've learned so much. The other reaction I get is, oh, I'm sorry. This is gonna be a tough one for you. But it is a complete privilege to be able to be here. It's a pleasure to be here with this and with Larry. And you know, he talked about the future patient. There was an initiative at UCSD. We started one called the Future Doctor. What does the doctor need to know? And we had this collaboration. This isn't our first rodeo on stage together. We've done this before, of doctor and patient talking about massive amounts of data. They made a movie about it at UCSD. You can just take a picture of this, or the UC Wellbeing channel. You can look at that. But it had to be more than just Larry and myself in this academic white ivory tower of doing things. And so I thought, well, how can we scale this? How can we get more Larrys that are out there? And there are no other Larrys that are out there. But lo and behold, I had a small grant at the university through my department, got a vast amount of cohort of other patients who had vast amounts of data on themselves. It was full genome sequencing, microbiome, biomarkers, wearables, whatever it was, I didn't care. As long as I had a large amount of data, we were starting to collect it. We got them together. We nicknamed it Project Apollo, after the discovery from Apollo, and Apollo, the Greek god of Nothi Satan, which is know thyself. And we talked about, you guys talked about self-care. And so this patient group really self-assimilated. Ben became the original part of the patient group when we first started. And so this was the next generation from this piece. And the idea is all of these people were creating these personal time series that what we talked about. How do you create these personal time series? And I borrowed methodologies that are out there that's in other industries, right? Many of you know that there's thousands, hundreds, thousands of arrays of sensors in everyone's car. And these sensors are telling the car's computer the health of that car every millisecond. Right? And this has already been done. Like, why don't we have this in healthcare? I went to my mechanic. My wife's car broke down. Went to the mechanic, and I was really interested. So I'm like, let me see how you diagnose this car. And he's like, well, it's really easy. You just plug the car into his mainframe computer, and bloop, there's the whole personal time series of that white Acura. And he's like, I know when your car started having problems. It was September 5th of last year. That's the first sensor that started. And then you can see as the health of the car went down. And I'm like, that's incredible. And he goes, no, it's more than that. So then he types in, this Acura was in 2012, and we're going to cross-reference into every white Acura that was made in 2012 and follow the population. And I was mind blown at the time. I looked at it, my mechanic, and I said, you're a better doctor than I am because you have more data. Why don't we have this with our patients? The wearables are out there. The devices are out there, right? Everyone has one on their wrist. Daniel saw this. I brought this up as a prop, right? People have these. This is a blood pressure unit, I believe. And so these are already out there. The revolution's already begun of these things. And I think the commercial market is starting to lead in this sense. The commercial market is getting out there faster than some of these medical devices. All of these data are going to these big companies in the cloud. I'm just asking as a primary care doctor, can I have a glimpse at that small data stream? Can I look at where that small data stream is going? Because I want to take better care of my patients. I want to know what's happening to them when they leave my office, right? There's something like 8,000 hours in the year, and you spend one of those with your primary care doctor. if you're lucky. More likely it's like 15 minutes with your primary care doctor. And that poor doctor has to make an inference of your health in that 15, 20 minutes, draw some blood, and then we'll see you again the next year. Why not, when they leave, you get access to information on how they're living their lives every day? So the next iteration is I decided to start a clinic around all of this, and we called this Measured Wellness as a homage to Larry, because there's an Atlantic article about him called The Measured Man. And the whole idea is to look at this thing called continuous health monitoring in medicine, right? We have that in the ICU, continuous health monitoring. You have it in the cardiac care units, but we don't have that in the outpatient setting. And can we replicate that in the outpatient setting? So this is what we do in our clinic. We grab all the data that the patients are doing, we bring them in and we collate that data, and then we wrap care around that patient. So I've trained myself, I've trained other providers, nurse practitioners, and physician assistants that I'm using a lot. I've also trained a lot of health coaches, nutritionists, physical therapists. All of them are data-centric, looking at these data trends every day, looking at trends to see where they're going. And we're wrapping this personalized care around each person. Well, we needed a tool to be able to do this, because it was a lot of academic sweat to get this done, because patients are sending you PDF files, CSV files, JSON files. And I told Larry, I'm like, I need help. Like, I got my computer, I had 4 screens at home, I had computers open all the time, there's spreadsheets everywhere. It was a mess. And I'm like, I need help doing this. I said, Larry, who do you know that can help me build somewhat of a dashboard, or can help me that's in this world of data-centric personalized medicine? And he introduced me to his son.
So I'm Benjamin Smarr. A lot of you know me as Larry's son now, which is I get a lot. Like Mike said, oh, you're Larry's doctor. I get that too. I will say it's one of the great privileges of my life. I didn't do much to earn that. It just worked out nicely. But I'm a professor between bioengineering and data science, and so you'll see in a little bit how we're developing those AIs that Ray is talking about, how we're trying to make sure that they're equitable in a heterogeneous population, and all of that is built on these personal time series.
So Ben and I he became a professor of data science at UCSD, so we started collaborating, and I said, Ben, this is a problem I have. My desk is a mess, I got PDFs and CSVs, I got all this stuff everywhere. We need something. And so he had his data science students start working on projects of building out these dashboards. So backing up the clinic, it was just myself at the time in that small grant. When I had the idea to get a clinic, the first hire I ever did for the clinic was not a medical assistant or a nurse practitioner or front office manager, all of that. The first hire I did for the clinic was a data scientist, because I hired one of his students and I said, I need help collating all this data, put it in a nice clean format. Hired another data science student. Had those data science students start interacting with my clinical staff that I hired. Then we get on, and my clinic is 100% virtual, by the way. So then we get on a Zoom call with the patient, and we bring up all the screens of the data, and we talk about all the different trends of where their things are going. Very similar to what you're doing with your financial advisors, right? Imagine going to your financial advisor now with the amount of information you go to your doctor with. And imagine the kind of questions, like, did you take your medications? I don't know. If you imagine that answer to your financial advisor, they have all that information. They're looking at your bank accounts. You know what's in your bank account, right? Why don't we know that for health? So these ideas of these health dashboards were brought out of that. One of my neighbors is a financial advisor and has one of those Bloomberg terminals, right? And then so I go shadow him, and I'm like, wow, what is this? What is this? And I use some of that to help design these dashboards. We ended up spinning out a lot of these projects from the dashboards, and I became partner and co-founder of a company called Ziva. So Ziva is the health tech company that's helping my clinic building these digital tools. And these digital tools create dashboards for clinicians. They also create an app that's very engaging for the patient to use, where all of the health data is going into that app. And they also create reports that come to me that I then put into the medical record. But also, it's my job to translate all of this data, because it's sometimes too much data. We don't want the patients to see too much, so the app only gives a little bit amount. When I'm looking at these reports, I can put it into the medical record, but we don't need to put 7 terabytes of Larry's information into the medical record, right? So it's my job as a physician to translate that data into a digestible form into the electronic health record. So again, the industry that I'm looking at is radiology. So technology and radiologists go hand in hand, but before the X-ray machine, there were no radiologists, right? And then now there's a multi-billion-dollar industry of radiology, and there's departments of medicine. So the radiologists, what they do is they sit there and they're looking at black and white images, mostly 2D, sometimes 3D, and which is basically data, and they're transcribing that data into paragraph format, and most of the time it ends up in one sentence, broken femur, and that's what the doctor can act on. So I'm using that as this analogy to how do we take massive amounts of data that patients are generating every day, how do we translate that into a digestible format to give to these primary care doctors that are out there to make more meaningful use of the stuff that you're using every day? So where is all of this taking us? Like, where is this is where I see the future of primary care going. It's very data-centric, very data-driven. You've seen a lot of innovation and everything that's happening to this day. And so Daniel wanted to talk to us about, like, where's the future for all of this sort of things. And so I wanted to bring us back to the past. So if you don't know this photo essay, this is Life Magazine, 1948. Just look up Life Magazine Country Doctor. It's a beautiful photo essay of Dr. Seriani in rural Colorado. And he did home visit. He was the town vet, the typical general practitioner for a very rural town. His social network was that he was part of the church. He would go to the rodeo. He was doing all that sort of stuff. He knew the ins and outs and the socioeconomic status of all of his patients. He took great care, and they did a wonderful award-winning photo essay of this. I read this when I was a medical student. It really inspired me to go into family medicine. I did a very rural family medicine rotation with a practitioner in Northern California that was very similar to this. He ran the ER, he ran the OBGYN ward in the town, and he was the town vet. He was the country doctor. I lived in a barn the whole time on his place. It was very surreal in some ways. But I'm looking at this, and if we had this Dr. Seriani, and he had the capability of where all this technology and artificial intelligence is going. We just heard from Ray about where artificial intelligence is going to go. If we could empower this type of physician, like, where would that take us, right? Right now in healthcare, we are overworked, we're overburdened, we're understaffed. And it's all for administrative duties that's taking us away from the doctor-patient relationship. So my hope is AI gets to the point where it lifts that heavy burden off of this, because what this picture and this photo essay is inspiring for is what's missing in medicine. We're missing the care piece, right? When's the last time the doctor, reached out and touched you, right? When's the last time we had the enhancement of that doctor-patient relationship? And I think technology can get us to that. If it lifts this administrative piece off that we're doing in medicine so much, we can come back to our roots of the reasons why we went to medical school in the first place. So I'm trying to emulate this physician. Technology, there's still a lot of work that I'm doing with it, but it's easing my job. Like, instead of arriving on a horse, I come in an electric vehicle to Larry's house, right? Instead of a black bag, I have an iPad. And so I know all of the information, what's happening with my patients before I even arrive to see them. I know how they slept last night. I know what their vital signs are. There's a little bit of an ease there, and it's completely transformed the way that I practice. It's transformed the way that I interact with my patients. My patients are a lot more engaged with their health journey. They're texting me all the time and everything, but it doesn't have to be me. We can set up an AI version of me, right, to help me deal with the patients and scale that way. So we need tools to be able to do this. And so luckily, I've been having these conversations with Ben to help build these tools out and to be a person who can build all of these sort of tools. And so we've had this collaboration that's been going on so well, and I'm so happy that he's at the university, and pleasure to be also his family doctor, but also be able to work with him professionally. And I'll let him talk about where he's taking it with the kind of tools that he has, not only for individual patients, but also for populations.
Thanks, Mike. So as I said, I'm a professor at UCSD, but I want to step back from that because, of course, I grew up in a sort of a weird context where, Dad likes to say his job is to live in the future and report back. And so he's very busy, for example, being this deeply quantified person, trying to say, what would be possible on somebody in a future where this technology is available. Even though it's much more available now, it's still not nearly as broad as it needs to be. So I grew up with that context, right? And I, for the last 20 years, have been watching Mike develop his medical practice, trying to integrate these kinds of data. And it's a lot of individual storytelling. And so just like he said, the challenges as I was building my career seemed like, well, okay, I know this kind of thing's going to be possible. I've seen it. I understand that what we're going to need to do is make it systematic. How do you make it reach a large population so that we have sort of virtual distributed mics for all of the billions of digital Larry-like people that we hope we'll have? So when I was starting my PhD, this was around 2006, I was doing a classic neuroscience, neuroendocrinology PhD. I was watching mice run in wheels and measuring things that way. But my dad got me a body media, which was the first commercially available wearable device at the time. Nobody had a clue what this thing was. People thought I was very weird. They had no idea. But I was starting to, I was watching these data on my mice, and the traditional thing is you say, well, okay, let's sum the number of times they ran in the wheel today, and you give them the drug, and you see if it changed. But I was looking at the data, and I was saying, well, but there's all these patterns in there. We're not capturing those patterns. How do we capture those patterns? So I started teaching myself data science because I was looking at the body media data, and I was starting to con my friends into doing weird projects with me. I was building sensors, or I was finding cargo loggers and taping them to myself and wearing them for months at a time. Because I was similar to my dad, I was trying to say, okay, I need to see, if we can see this stuff in these animals, what's it going to look like when we have that in humans? What are we going to be able to see? In the animals, what I was starting to see was all kinds of things. We could tell when they were getting cancer. We could tell when they got pregnant within a day. We could tell were they aging healthily or not, were they recovering from an injury or not, just wonderful, amazing things that shook out of the data. Drove me to become a data scientist. And again, I was looking at these very small n-value experiments happening with people like Larry, like myself, like Mike, and saying, man, this stuff is really exciting. We got to get there. And it really wasn't until I started my professorship inauspiciously in March of 2020 at UCSD when everything started shutting down because the COVID pandemic started taking off. It wasn't until then that people started saying to me, gee, maybe this could actually be useful for something, right? And so the NIH actually said, well, wearables are kind of toys. That's not really how we measure things in medicine, kid. Don't worry about it. But it was the DoD that surprised me. Extremely mature perspective on exposure detection. Very quickly came in with a large amount of funding. And so my very close friend and colleague, Ashley Mason, is a sleep clinician at UCSF. She and I had been working together with this company, Aura, which at the time was pretty new. But it was the first wearable device company that had temperature sensors. And from my own research, I knew that temperature showed us a lot of precision that heart rate or activity miss because they change all the time. They're much more socially masked. Temperature is much more physiological. And so we struck up a wonderful relationship. I helped them establish their US science office before I then took my position at UCSD. And so it was just timely that we were able to make this study, TempPredict. And what that did was, it was a unique moment historically where we were able to reach out through Aura, and we were able to say, if you're a user of the device, there's this pandemic going on, right? These data have not historically existed, so we don't know what COVID looks like, but I had already been looking at friends as they got sick and Aura users as they got Lyme disease and flares, and we knew we could see sickness. I knew that we could see that. I could show the DoD these images. And so I'll show you these images. We launched this study where 100,000 people globally responded to us. And they said, take my data. They ended up answering millions of survey responses over 2020, which is amazing. And it was not because I made them. It was not because Aura owned their data. It was because they were interested in a shared problem. They had this pandemic looming over them. They wanted to know about COVID. So what you can see here is the first several dozen patients on average that we had. The gray area is when we're detecting that they're sick. You notice it's before things start to spike. That 0 day is diagnosis. And what we can do is reliably, algorithmically detect when you're getting sick before you feel that you're getting sick, usually by at least a day. Again, this ended up covering about 65,000 people that were actually following up and engaged in generating data across the year. So on the top, we're looking at heart rate and heart rate variability across weeks. So those 14, 7, 0, those are days. And then on the bottom, temperature while you're asleep, temperature while you're awake. And you notice they're not the same. You notice there's a lot of spikiness to it. So initially, this was a great success, right? We said, okay, we can absolutely detect illness. Aura is using this, DoD is using this. lots of other groups are starting to adopt this idea that outpatient data could be used to guide treatment decisions. We were even able to close the loop with behavior. We were able to say, hey, it looks like you're getting sick, you should go get a test. And we did this with several thousand medical first responders. But that's not actually new, I would argue. Right? I think all of us are used to the idea that our behavior can be modified algorithmically because we go on Amazon and it goes, people like you might want to buy this thing. Right? So we're actually very used to this idea that our data are driving algorithmic decision making. We're just not used to it in health because the data, the personal time series data to see that change hasn't existed. Because we gathered so many people's data, we were able to see a lot more than just COVID. Right? This makes it look very easy. And in fact, there's a lot of complexity. So we can start to disaggregate instead of just one-size-fits-all algorithms for what does COVID look like. Here now, the different colors are age brackets, so different decades of life of these tens of thousands of people we were monitoring. This is a year. All those vertical spikes are weekends. And it turns out, if you look at just your heart rate, for example, on average, people's heart rate changes as much every Saturday as it does when they get COVID. And so there's this really interesting signal processing problems that we have to deal with. It's also the case, you'll notice, that the older individuals at the top here, their spikes are smaller on average than the big orange spikes of the younger folks, right? So one size fits all really doesn't work. Now, we've heard at this conference how a lot of groups haven't generated as much data as others, right? So we have three what's called weird, right? Sort of Western educated, industrialized, resourced people, Western society basically, three white guys. We generate lots of data, and most of medicine has been developed on us. But we had to generate very complex algorithms to make this work to identify not just men and women, for example, but cyclic women. So women has been massively underserved. Obviously, other ethnicities have been. It turns out the elderly have been. There's very little medical literature on what aging looks like. And so when we're looking at things like this, we can say, oh, we need to tune the algorithm to work better on these different groups who has historically been so underrepresented. So we need to transform this because this is still very aggregate. This still really doesn't give you the sense of how different people are. So I had some ambitious students. I loved that I was working with Mike during this time because he said, this COVID stuff is cool, but like I'm trying to build my dashboard. It was great to be able to shuttle students towards him in that way. Some of these students came back and they said, okay, Ben, we've cut down the data set. We had to get the people that only had 6 months of data that was really high quality so that it was a good comparison set. So I'm really sorry, it cuts the numbers down to a lean 700,000 weeks of data. And I said, okay, well, I'm used to doing ends of 5 and 12 and stuff like that, right? I said, okay, you guys are good, that's fine. And so what we do is we generate these data landscapes. Now, in reality, these are very high-dimensional objects, right? We might have 100 different dimensions here, different aspects of your health, of your variables that we're deriving mathematically. But I can't see 100 dimensions. I don't think anybody here can. I can see 2 or 3 dimensions. So we project mathematically through that high-dimensional data to get an intuition. And what we're looking at here is 5 million nights of data, 5 million days rather, across roughly 40,000 people. And on the left here, we have age. So the greener, bluer is younger individuals, and you can see these gradients into the more golden areas of aging individuals. That's who do you look like? Physiologically, who does the machine think you look like, right? What does an algorithm see in the world? It navigates these spaces. Then on the right, we have the red and blue. So red is males, blue is females. And AI alone actually can't do a lot with these data. Again, what was really special about this study was that we had so much buy-in from the users, from the participants. And they were able to tell us what's going on in their lives. So they would give us symptoms for COVID, but they would also say, I have diabetes, or I have a surgery coming up on Thursday, and that's going to mess with my data. And so we had this very rich label set, which is otherwise missing from, for example, Apple has easily hundreds of times this much data, but they're not developing health in the same way, in part because what are the data about? You need people to want to buy in, right? COVID was a thing that a lot of us shared as a reason to buy in, which made this kind of infrastructure possible. And so we could look on these maps and we could say, okay, if I'm an average, younger to the left, greener, female to the bottom, what's the route I take through this landscape when I get COVID versus somebody else? And those routes turn out to be different. And when you disaggregate people into the minorities that describe them, who are you really like, the digital minorities, the physiotypes, then you can do much more accurate on everybody detection. In fact, our false positive rate is almost 0 at this point. So I want to show you what that looks like. So here's a more simple map. And this is 2 different individuals. Here's 2 more. And you can see by eye, as they're living in this, now this is a smaller sleep landscape, some of those individuals are moving around a lot, right? They're not static in the landscape. You're not just an average. You have this route through the landscape that you live through your personal data. And what you might see is the two on the left look like they're moving around a lot more. The two on the right, this big purple circle, that's a reasonably healthy island of sleep. Most nights are in that island. But we see there's one person who's really at home on the bottom of it, and one person who's really at home on the top of it. They don't move a lot, they're quite stable, but they're clearly different from each other. And when they take roads into these green and red and yellow islands, that route turns out to be really predictive of illness onset. So that red island, for example, is associated with diabetes. And it's not that you're there more on average necessarily, it's the routes that you're taking, it's the dynamics over time. So we can functionalize that, and you've seen maps like this of, where do all the planes fly from every airport to every airport, same thing. What is the actual route that humans take across these high-dimensional landscapes? How does their time series look like other people's? Who's like whom? Because again, ultimately, precision medicine implies all of us are a minority of some sort. I have my concerns. And then that gives us somewhere between 2 and 10 times as much information about actually detecting different conditions on different people. So it's harvesting these things, it's collaboration, right? We've heard a lot about the future is AI. In fact, the future is collaboration. The AIs don't understand things intuitively. They can't. They understand data. So if all they're trained on is historical data sets, they'll only really be good at reproducing the biases that we do. And in fact, that continues to be published on. But the more we all get involved in generating our own cases, finding people that share our interests, and coming together to share those data, then doctors like Mike, with their doctor AIs, we can all collaborate to build the future of medicine. No medical school can train you on this. It's new tools. It's new data. So I'm going to let my dad take over now because he's going to give you a good intuition, I think, for what is that personal journey that more and more of us are going to be participating in as we build that future of medicine together.
Well, I'm glad that Benjamin ended with that word sharing because, of course, I'm famous for oversharing the inside of my body. And I can't stop. So
you should see his freezer at home.
So, we've talked about a lot of different kind of wearable blood. Even in my case, I've got 700 days of stored stool at 80 below zero, and Professor Rob Knight's lab we're now writing papers on the sequencing of that for the first time in an individual. I'm probably the only one in the world that has that long a record of the dynamics of the microbiome ecology in one individual. That will be part of all of you within the next 5 to 10 years, but somebody's got to go first. So one of the other kinds of time series is imaging. And we heard yesterday from Pronuvo about the full body imaging. I've been doing full body imaging on myself since 2008 through a bunch of different technologies, some in companies, some in universities. I might have dozens and dozens of images of my inside of my body, and then I can use them as a time series. Well, you should think seriously about Daniel Kraft's offer of the special on getting that full body scan. I joined Human Longevity in 2017 when Craig Venter started that and got, of course, my whole genome and everything else. But they do an annual full body looking at 12 organs in the body for cancer. And my wife is in it as well. And so then in January 23, when we had our day of tests, we came back and they said, well, Larry, we've got great news. Your wife has no cancer and 12 organs in the body. And we've got slightly less good news for you. You've only got cancer in one of your organs, and that's the prostate. But, of course, the beauty was that this was very early detection because on that day, 1,000 men in America also were diagnosed with prostate cancer, 1,000 a day. And so over, say, 3 years, that's 1/3 over a year is 1/3 over 3 years is 1 million diagnoses of prostate cancer. You can see it's tiny. And I, of course, immediately sat back and said, well, I've got over 100 cc prostate, so If that thing's a few millimeters, it's less than 1%. So I think before you pull my prostate out, which is the standard of care, radical prostatectomy, I would be liking to look at a focal, a high precision, the sort of thing Ray was talking about, surgical intervention. And it turned out that UCLA had a group that was at the leading edge of this. And I was fortunate enough to get to be one of an early patient in this. So there's about, of that million men in the last year, about 1 in 1,000 have gotten this treatment. And when Ken was talking about human longevity a few days ago, you notice he talked about focused ultrasound. Well, that's exactly what this is. There's a thin tube with about 16 actuators that are under software control that go up the urethra, which goes right through, conveniently, the center of the prostate. And those are under software control to intersect their waves over time while I'm in the MRI. That's me. That's actually a photograph from it. And the doctors have this as their, during the basically hour, every 5 seconds, I get an MRI. Now that is high time frequency personal data. Getting an MRI every year is pretty cool, but getting it every 5 seconds is for me, a world record. So I was so cool. Of course, I'm totally under anesthesia. I have no idea this is going on. But they, of course, kept the movie and gave it to me later on a stick. And so I figured, well, I should be sharing that with you. And so this is the, let's see, okay, can you guys click it? It should go into a movie form. If you just click on the slide, hopefully, okay. So anyway, what this is it looks like a Doppler radar, and I don't know why the movie isn't working.
Let me take a whack at it.
Yeah.
Transformational.
But what it amounts to is they intersect the, there it goes. Oh, thank you. That's why, you know, you wonder how come you spend 40 years raising up your children, and, you know.
How does this TV work?
This is a part of, by the way, it's a very important part of healthy aging, to have young children that can take care of you as you falter in old age. Notice that the intersection under software control, this is all driven by robots, basically, and the doctors are just watching the screens. The robots are doing all this. And all it's doing is ablating. The red is 190 degrees Fahrenheit. I remind you, 212 Fahrenheit is boiling. So inside the capsule of my prostate, they are basically boiling, close to boiling, a sphere that they have designed from the MRI, a map of my 3D map of the prostate, where the cancer is, make a sphere around that, and then boil it and kill everything inside of it. And by the way, that also, they decided to give me a twofer and reduce the volume of my prostate by about a factor of 2 or 3, so I'm back to normal now. But after all that, and I come out of the anesthesia, they said, well, we'll see you. You know, come back in 6 months. And I said, wait, no. You just did this to me. What's going to happen? How's my body going to react and everything? He said, no, it's good. We'll give you an antibiotic in case you catch an UTI. I couldn't deal with it. So fortunately, I have Thummy, which is my trusty SpO2 that measures several thousand values of SpO2, my dissolved oxygen in my blood, every night. And normally, that's a trace I get from, in this case, 9 a.m. to 5 a.m. on the left. The red line is 90% SpO2, dissolved oxygen. 9 days after this event, that's what I saw. And in fact, there's the bar graph. That's the number of hours a night I'm below 90%. If I was in the doctor's office, normally you get one of these, 3 times a year when they're taking your blood pressure. And if I came in at, 75% or 80%, they'd twist me into the back room and, I don't know, use the paddles on me or something. Yeah, well, 8 hours a night, below 90%. And I only knew that because of this wearable that was generating a personal time series. And so I wrote back to the world-class team at UCLA, and they say, that's pretty cool. We didn't know about it. I just used an AI to say, has there ever been have you ever seen this between this antibiotic Bactin? And they came back with essentially a crowdsourced medical trial, which says if you're over 60 and you have this for less than a month, it's a very good chance that old sulfa antibiotic is going to deoxygenate you. So it wasn't that this wasn't known, it just wasn't involved in medical practice. So thankfully enough, they said, why don't you come back to UCLA and give us a seminar on this? That's it.
And again, it's such a privilege and a pleasure to take care of patients like Larry, and with the methodologies that he does. He texts me these things, the middle. Look at my oxygen, like he says, oversharing. Have you seen inside my prostate yet? Check out my colon. But these are things that are, again, changing the way that I practice. Prescribing that antibiotic, I'm like, why don't you check your oxygen saturation if you're over 60? Like, I didn't know about that. Right? These are the discoveries that these personal things, these personal time series insights and discoveries that can be made. And like Ben said, it's not just the personal data. Then you find your tribe. You find like, oh, who are the patients like me? And I love that slide of Ben in the island, because then that's the landscape of where you are. And you're not static. You're moving around all the time. And you might be like, oh, I'm going to this great green island over here. Well, that green island is Alzheimer's. You might want to paddle the boat over here. So then it's like the job of software or the doctor to say, hey, redirecting, like where can we make those interventions earlier so they're not spending all that time over there. So I think what we want to say is personal time series is the revolution. Everyone has devices out there. They're cheap. You can get them at any drugstore out there. They're ask them for your next Christmas present or whatever. But then talk to your physicians about the kind of time series that you are generating. And like Ben said, you mentioned the AI. Like the AI has to feed off the data. Like, yep. Where are we getting the data from?
Yep.
So one thing I want you to think about is we're just going to walk off the stage because our clock says 0. Where is this going to continue?
Exactly.
One of the things institutionally that I think you saw here is the University of California at San Francisco, University of California, Los Angeles, University of San Francisco at San Diego, University of California as an institution. The doctors, the people like Chris Longhurst you saw the other day, who's the head of IT for the UCSD Medical, those folks were deeply engaged with us as we were doing all this. They see it all. Ben the institute he's in has how many students in the data science?
We have about 1,200 right now.
1,200, and they all need a project. They're
Yep.
data scientists, and they need a project. And there's a great tradition at UCSD of between the engineering school and the medical school. So I think you watch that space, even though it's challenging times, it'll get a lot more challenging in the days to come for the academic sector. But the University of California has been around a long time. There are many other universities like it, and so many of the companies that we've heard about and we saw in the breakout room have come from innovations in academic systems. Yep. So I think that's where this incubation is going to happen, but there's going to be so many companies, so many startups and things around it. But just watch this space. We think this is where the data is going to come from that those hungry AIs want to munch on.